to picture the gritty, smoke-filled, literally blood-soaked trenches of World War I. Just imagine the relentless noise, the deafening explosions, the crack of gunfire echoing across freezing mud, the frantic shouts of young soldiers who've been explicitly ordered by their commanders to kill the enemy on sight. It was a waking nightmare. But then, amidst all that horrific noise and violence, the gunfire just stopped. There was a sudden, unbelievable silence. Okay, let's dive into this, because December 24th, 1914 changes everything. Imagine you're bracing for another artillery shell, and instead, complete quiet falls over the battlefield. And out of that unbelievable silence, right into the center of a frozen, muddy wasteland between bitter enemies, a football appears. It sounds like absolute fiction, doesn't it? Like a scene from a movie. But it's an insane, completely true story. Men who had spent months trying to destroy one another suddenly stepped out of their hiding places, shook hands, shared cigarettes, and found a shred of shared humanity. Section 1, The Nightmare in Trenches. So the crucial point is, to really understand the magnitude of what happened, we need to look at the grim reality of the winter of 1914. Consider this staggering number: 1 million. By the time December rolled around, World War I had only been raging for 5 months. Just 5 months. And yet nearly 1 million young men were already dead. This massive death toll establishes the incredibly grim stakes of the Western Front. We're talking about a scale of mechanized slaughter that the world had simply never seen before, setting a horrific stage for the young soldiers who actually managed to survive into the winter. Just look at the daily reality for these troops. Both the British and German sides were entirely trapped in this misery. They were living in trenches, literally filled with freezing mud and frozen water. They were tormented daily by infestations of rats. And on top of that physical torture, there was a deep, aching homesickness, amplified by the holiday season. They had absolutely nothing to look forward to except the terrifying expectation of more violence and, honestly, likely certain death. That was the only reality they knew, right up until the sunset on Christmas Eve. Section 2, Miracle on No Man's Land. As night fell over the trenches, the atmosphere completely shifted. Deep in the darkness of that snowy night, with tiny candle lights flickering across the trench lines, the British soldiers heard something impossible. Floating across the freezing air from the German trenches was the faint, unmistakable sound of singing. They were singing Stille Nacht, Silent Night. And instead of lifting their rifles to fire back into the dark, the British soldiers actually started singing along in English. And this brilliantly illustrates the unbelievable contrast of that night. On one hand, you have the grim reality they were supposed to be living, firing guns, hiding in miserable trenches, treating every movement as a deadly enemy. But on the other, you have this spontaneous truce that blossomed instead. Slowly, without a single order from their generals, in fact, in direct defiance of them, unarmed men stepped out into no man's land. They stepped right into the ultimate death zone to exchange family photos, to share simple human comforts like plum puddings, and even to cut each other's hair. This was the tipping point. Someone across the darkness shouted, "You no shoot, we no shoot." And that exact human catalyst is what brought hundreds of terrified, freezing men out of their muddy holes and into the snow together. It was a mutual, spontaneous agreement of trust in a place where trust absolutely did not exist. Section 3, The Most Important Match. And that brings us to what might just be the most incredible part of this entire story. Out of nowhere, amid the plum puddings and the exchange photos, a football was tossed into the snow. Now, what's really interesting about all these details is how beautifully organic this whole game was. They didn't have a pristine pitch, caps and helmets were just piled up in the snow to serve as makeshift goalposts. The ball itself was likely just a bundle of rags tied together, though some records suggest a British soldier might have actually brought a real leather ball to the front. It was Germany versus Britain, right there in the middle of a war zone. There were no referees, absolutely no official uniforms, just pure, unadulterated passion. For those 90 minutes, these fiercely competitive young men played without any formal rules, completely forgetting the global conflict that brought them there in the first place. And yes, there was actually a score. Historical records and letters sent home by the soldiers themselves suggest that the Germans actually won the match, 3-2. But the score hardly matters compared to what it represents. It proves that for a glorious, fleeting moment in time, these men were not deadly enemies. They were just guys playing the game they loved, enjoying a fiercely competitive but entirely friendly match in the snow. Section 4, Humanity in Darkest Times. But as we know, history is rarely a fairy tale, and the sun eventually had to set on Christmas Day. The harsh, brutal reality of the First World War was waiting for them just over the horizon. Let's see how this builds. On December 24th, this fragile truce begins with a simple, shared song in the dark.
On December 25th, it peaks with an incredible historic football match where enemies become ordinary young men again. But then, on December 26th, the very next morning, the high-ranking generals found out about this unauthorized peace. They were absolutely furious. They issued strict orders forcing the men back to their trenches, and tragically, the killing resumed. The war would go on to consume millions more lives.
But the generals couldn't erase what happened. For one brief shining moment, a simple game of football proved to be more powerful than a world war. It proved that light can exist in the absolute darkest of times. So I leave you with this final thought. If the core of our humanity, our ability to connect, share, and play, can survive in the frozen hell of no man's land, where else can it thrive? Take a moment to reflect on that. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep seeking out the incredible stories hidden in our history, and I'll see you next time.